Now that we've set up our user database, let's go ahead and register users within our app. So for now, we've been able to basically bring our server up and also set up a simple database. So the next thing we're going to do is to set up an endpoint or an API endpoint that's going to be responsible for helping us to be able to register new user accounts. So to do that, what I'm going to do is to bring down our terminal. So I'll close it for now. And I'm going to create a new file. So you can feel free to create a package, but I'm going to do all the authentication logic within one specific module or file. So I'll call this auth.py. And within auth.py, we are going to go ahead and create a blueprint. So think of a blueprint as a collection of endpoints that are responsible for something. Now, the Flask blueprint class allows us to create these blueprints, and this can help us to be able to create routes and basically define them to be carrying out related functionality. And this is basically useful when you go ahead and create a large project, as it's going to help you to make it more modular and have a certain structure. So to begin, what we're going to do is to import the blueprint class. So I'll come and say from Flask, we are going to go ahead and import our blueprint. So once we've imported blueprint, we are going to create our auth blueprint. So shall call this our auth blueprint. And once we've created our auth blueprint, we are going to simply come create our blueprint, and we shall have to provide for it a name. Now I'll call my blueprint auth, and after calling it auth, I'm going to provide our import name. So just going to provide the standard name object. So once we've been able to provide that, you can provide things such as the static folder and the template folder, but we're going to leave this at this point for now. So let's go ahead and basically create our endpoint. So I'm going to come right here, and all I have to do is to say at auth blueprint dot. Now in this case, I have to call an HTTP method. You can call any of these methods just like you see right here, but what we're interested in is basically calling an HTTP method. Now you can call get, you can call post and all that stuff, but what we need now is going to be the post method. And now we have to define the URL or the rule that we want to access when we want to register a user. So I'll define our URL as the register URL. So this is going to actually be register. And once we have been able to do that, then the next thing is going to be for us to basically go ahead and define our handler function. So every time we define a route, we have to define a function that's going to handle what shall happen when you visit that specific endpoint. Now in this case, we're going to come and say def, and in this case we shall say register, and in this case we shall say register user account or register user, call it whatever you want. And for now, let's just return a simple message. So shall just come and say return. And in this case, what we shall do is to basically return a simple JSON response. Now to return a JSON response, we are going to import JSONify, which is a function that's going to help us to return a JSON response. So I'll come at the top right here and say from Flask import JSONify, and then I'll come right here and say return JSONify. So I'll go ahead and provide our dictionary. Now this is going to have a message of, let's say, user created. So we have not yet handled the logic for creating a user, but all we're going to do is to just return this message of user created. I'm going to go ahead and save it, and once I save, I'm going to have to register this blueprint onto our main app. So I'll head over to main.py, and the first thing I'm going to do is to import our blueprint. So I'll come and say from auth, we are going to go ahead and import our auth blueprint. And once I've imported our auth blueprint, the next thing is going to be to basically go ahead and register that blueprint. Now I'm going to do that, so I'll just come and add a comment here. So this is going to be initialize So this will be for initializing apps, or let's say extensions. And then right here we shall basically say that we shall be registering our blueprint. So in this case we're going to register our blueprint. So just come right here and say register blueprint. And once I've been able to do that, the next thing is going to be to register our auth blueprint. So to do that, we shall just come and call our app instance, and then I'll say dot register blueprint, and then we shall have to register the blueprint. So our blueprint in this case is going to be our auth blueprint, but we can define other properties on this auth blueprint, such as the URL prefix, which is going to be the URL in which we can access all the routes that belong to that specific blueprint. I'm just going to come and say URL prefix, and in this case this is going to be /auth, so that each time we want to access an authentication URL, we actually have to say /auth/login or /auth/signup or whatever. So once we've been able to do that, the next thing is going to be for us to go ahead and test our endpoint. So hope our server is running. So if we come to our server, it's running. Now I'm going to be using Postman. You can feel free to use any other tools such as Insomnia or even old school Cal. So what I'll do is to come right here and open my Postman app, and within my Postman I'm going to go ahead and create a new request, and then I'll basically create that request. So I even have a collection right here that's called JWT Flask. So within this collection, I'm just going to add a new request, and let me make this full screen. So I create a new request, I'll give it a name. So let's say this is going to be specific to creating a new user. So I'll press enter, and after doing this, then we shall make a request to our root URL, which is localhost 5000. Now come right here and basically create the request. So I'll say localhost 5000, and then I'll go to the /auth prefix, and then I'll try to access the register URL. So when you access this with a post request, all we're going to see is our message of user created successfully. Now keep in mind that our user has not yet been created. So one thing we can do is to now write the logic that's responsible for creating our user. So to begin, what I'm going to do is to head over right where we have our user model, and I'm going to define some functions that are going to be necessary for creating a new user. So the first function we're going to create is one for basically creating or basically generating a password hash for our user. Now lucky for us, Flask comes with most of its tools built around Workzug, which is basically a set of tools that allow development of WSGI servers, or what some people call WSGI servers. So what I'll do is to come right here at the top, and I'll access the security modulars provided by Workzug, and then we shall be able to hash our passwords easily. So I'll come right here and say from Workzug.security, we are going to import our generate password hash function. I'm going to define a method right here, and this is going to be responsible for generating a password for our user. So I'll call this method def generate, and in this case I'll call it generate password, and this will take in self, and it will basically take in a password as well. So shall have a password. So once we have this, then let's actually just call this set password. For simplicity, I'll call this set password. So once we have it as set password, now what we want to do is to basically return the password for that specific object. So what shall say is self.password is going to be equal to the result of generating the password hash for that specific provided password. And that will be just enough to set the password for that specific user object. Now another thing we may want to do is to check if our password is valid. Now this will be useful when we are logging in. So I'll import one more method or one more function from this module, and that's going to be our check password hash. So this is going to work in a way that's going to check a provided password and compare it with a saved password hash, and then return true or false depending on whether these two actually match. So to do that, I'll just come and say def check password, and this is going to take in self, and it will also take in the password hash. So in this case, we shall actually take in the password. So what we need here is to just return the result of checking for the password. So we shall just call our check password function or check password hash function, and then provide the password. So in this case shall be self dot password, and then we shall also take in the provided password. So shall provide our password. So once we've been able to do this, now let's also write one more method that's going to be basically helping us to check if our user exists. So what we're going to do is to just simply query for our user. So to do that, I'll just come and say def, and I'll call this get user by ID. So it's actually not going to be get user by ID, but let's say we're going to get a user by their username. So I'll just come and say user by their username. And this is going to actually be a class method. So I'll have to decorate this method with that class method. And once I've been able to do that, now we also need to have a username. And when we have this username, we are now going to query for that specific class. So one thing we forgot is, well, defining a class method, we have to first of all provide the class that we want to provide. So we shall say class and then provide the username. And once we've been able to do that, we shall just come and say return. And here what we want to do is to say class dot query. So we're going to be using the query object, and we shall call the method of filter by, so in this case we want to filter by, we want to get that object with a username that's equal to the provided username. So we shall say username and then dot first, and this will be enough for us to basically be able to get our user with that username. So once we've been able to define this, let's go ahead and use it to basically create a new user. Now one thing we can also do is to define a method for saving our user. So that's going to be as easy as basically coming and define a save method. So shall just come and say def save, and this will take in self. And what we're going to do right here is to basically go ahead and save our user. So we shall use our db object. So we can come and say db dot session. So this will be adding it to the session. So we shall say db dot session dot add, and then we shall add self, which is the current user object, and then db dot session dot commit, and that will be saving our object to the database. We can also define one for deleting, so it's going to be the same thing. So just basically copy this. It will only change by basically deleting. So if we basically come and change this, so it's going to be def delete, and what we shall have here is going to be basically deleting the object, just like you see right here. So once we've been able to set this up, now the next thing is going to be for us to go ahead and create our new user. So to create our new user, what we're going to do is to head over to our auth.py, and the first thing we shall have to do is to get the data from the request, or the data that actually comes when a user makes a request to our endpoint. So the way we can access that is by accessing our request object, and the request object is provided to us by Flask, so we shall have to import it. So I'll just come right here and say from Flask import our request object. So once I've been able to import the request object, now come right here and access our data. So I'll say data is going to be equal to request dot get, and in this case shall get our JSON. So once we've been able to get our JSON, the next thing is going to be for us to basically get a user object with the username as provided from the JSON. So to do that, I'll just come at the top right here and import our user model. So I'll just come and say from models, we are going to import our user model. And once we've been able to do that, I'll just come right at the bottom right here and say that we're going to check for our user, and our user is going to be equal to user. So since we defined our method for getting a user by their username, we can just say user.get user by username, and we shall have to provide the username. So in this case, I'll just come and say that we shall check for the username. I want to check for the username that's equal to what we get from our data. So in this case, we shall say data.get username. So this will return our user. So the next thing is going to be to check if this user actually exists, and we shall also be able to raise an error in case this user exists. So to do that, we shall just come and say if user is not none. So actually, let's say if user is not none, that's if the user is not yet existing, then we shall pass this for now, and else. So in this case, that's if the user actually exists, then you want to actually raise an error right here. So to do that, what we shall do is to just come right here and return an error. So in this case, we can say return JSONify, and we can return an error. So let's say error, and in this case we shall say user already exists. So that will actually catch this error. So once we want to only return this response in case we've been able to create a new user. So I'll cut this and then I'll basically paste it right down here. So if user is not none, then we are going to be able to create a new user. So if user is not none, that's actually when the user exists. I don't know why I'm confusing this. So what happens is if the user is none, that's when you're actually going to return this message of our user already existing. And in case the user is not none, that's when the user is not none, that's when the user does not exist. That's actually when you're going to go ahead and create a new user. So to create a new user, we're going to come and create a new user object. So I'll create a new user, and this new user is going to be a user. So this user will have the different properties or the different attributes. Now in this case, we shall have our username, and our username is going to be equal to data.get, and in this case we shall provide our username. So we shall say username, and the next thing we shall have to provide is going to be our email. So we shall say that our email is going to be equal to data.get, and in this case we shall provide our email. So for the password, we are going to need to provide our password just like we defined right here. So to set our password, what we're going to do is to come right here and say new user dot set password, and then in here we're going to provide our password. So our password is going to be equal to what we get from the data. So we shall say data.get, and in this case shall provide our password. So this will be enough to hash our password. And just in case we need to save the user, we shall just come right here and say new user dot save. and this will be able to save our user. So let's go ahead and test our endpoint. So to be honest, what we've done is to basically write symbology for creating a user, but you can implement this in a way that you want. So what we're going to do is to go right within our postman, and in our postman we are actually going to send this request with some data. So if we try to send this request, we now see that we have unsupported media types. We need to basically send one that's application/JSON. So to do that, we're going to go to our body, and within our body, what we're going to do is to basically set our body to send raw JSON. So we're going to send our body to raw JSON, and for us to achieve that, I'm just going to come and change these things. I'm actually going to set this to be in a vertical format so that the request is here and the response is here. So what I'll do is to come right here and create a new JSON object. So shall have our username, and our username is going to be John Doe, let's say 123. So shall have our email. So our email in this case is going to be equal to John Doe 1234 at, let's say, gmail.com. And then we can have our password. So let's have a test password. So just going to set up a test password, and this test password is going to be our test pass 123. So if we set this up and we try to make this request, when we send this, we now see that our user has been created. However, we see that the response that's being returned is a 200 status code, and we want to actually return the right response for creating a resource. So shall have to change a few things. So in here, what we're going to do is to basically add one for forbidden, showing that we do not allow creating a user who is existing. And here what we need to throw is a 201 status code. So if we try to create a user, so if I try to create a user, we see that 403 forbidden and our user already exists. However, when you go back to creating a new user, so I'll try to maybe change this to from John to Jen. So what I'll do is to go ahead and change this name from John to, let's say, it's actually going to be from John, and we're going to have John. So I'll change this to Jen, and I'll also change this to Jen. And if I try to make this request again, shall see that our user has been created and a 201 status code has been created. So at this point, we've been able to create our user accounts.